Welcome to our first online presentation of the Will Miller Social Justice Lecture Series. While I'm disappointed that we won't be together in the same room, I'm pleased to say that we have a wider audience that reaches beyond the Burlington, Vermont region due to our online format. I hope that those of you who are joining us for the first time will come again. I encourage you to join our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or visit our webpage to learn about Will, see some of our previous lectures, and join our email list so you can be informed of future lectures. This lecture series began in January 2005 in honor of my late husband, Will Miller. Our first event was with Brian Jones, who is currently the Director of Education at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, and who brilliantly presented Howard Zinn's play, Marx in Soho. We were fortunate to have Will with us for this presentation. Will passed away in March 2005, but before he passed, he helped us develop our purpose and plans for this lecture series. We have produced 26 events in his memory. Will Miller was a social justice activist and philosophy professor at the University of Vermont for 35 years. As our logo states, he will always be remembered as a clear voice in a world of false words and disinformation. This lecture series brings speakers to the Burlington, Vermont community to provide us with a radical analysis of social, ecological, and political concerns. We invite speakers to talk about relevant current issues and who provide us with radical insights on topics that Will would want us to be discussing. Will set a courageous example in speaking truth to power. He showed boundless optimism and demonstrated a passion for the truth. His voice was powerful, especially in encouraging others, students, staff, faculty, community members, and people from around the world, to speak up and be heard. He would be incredibly impressed with the work that Jesse is doing in schools with young adults, in his classroom, on the streets, and within his community, working to make positive change for social and racial justice in our country. Will showed a personal strength and an unwavering commitment to the struggle against war and for social justice, and helped move others toward activism. He was never afraid to speak his mind, put words into action, or place himself on the line, whether before university trustees fighting for divestment from South Africa, on a picket line for striking workers, at a barricade in front of a nuclear power plant, or in a congressional office. His insightful analysis into the origins and workings of capitalism and imperialism gave us a call to struggle and provided a vision of a more just society. He advocated for a society where all work is valued, where truth is not silenced but is nurtured, where all are treated as equals, that is at peace with itself, and where people and resources are not exploited. For the board of the Will Miller Social Justice Lecture Series, I welcome you to our Spring 2021 online presentation.
Hi, my name is Isaac Kreisman. I'm a teacher and a board member for the lecture series, and I have the honor and pleasure of introducing our speaker for the spring lecture, Jesse Hagopian. It was about 12 months ago that we had to cancel our last scheduled lecture, and I can't think of anyone better to restart our series than our guest, Jesse. This is a year that has been dominated, of course, by the pandemic, but this year of the pandemic has been nothing if not dynamic. In May, we found ourselves in crowds for the first time in months with the eruption of historic protests for Black lives. This movement is forcing a reckoning in this country with race and racism throughout all of the institutions that order and reproduce society, including schools. It's a movement that has often been led by students and has drawn educators as well as other workers into struggle. This same year that has brought such violence in so many forms has also been continually punctuated by labor unrest, from Amazon workers organizing for a union to NBA players striking. If anyone can bring clarity and insight to this turbulent reality that is at the same time terrifying and hopeful, it's Jesse. He is a founding member of the Social Equity Educators Caucus of the Seattle Education Association and is the co-editor of the recently released books Black Lives Matter at School and Teacher Unions and Social Justice. I started becoming familiar with Jesse's work during my first year working in a school following his writings about the 2015 Seattle teacher strike. I was taken by his ability to tie together demands for wages for teachers with calls for more recess for students and racial equity teams for schools. Over the past decade, which has seen this ground-shifting rise of social justice unionism in education, Jesse has been an important part of this movement. As a high school teacher, union militant, social justice activist, and writer, Jesse has been consistently advancing a vision of education justice that both demands long-term systemic changes led by working-class communities and different classrooms and curriculum that lift up people who have been left behind and left out of schooling in America. In a political landscape that often counterposes issues of race and class, Jesse's work in theory and in practice weaves together demands for racial and economic justice. On a final note, before we turn to Jesse here, I want to let everyone know that there will be a Q&A after the talk, and we will be pulling questions from the comment section. So please add your questions there at any point during the lecture. Now, without further ado, let's turn to Jesse Hagopian. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for that warm introduction. I really appreciate that. I'm glad you remember our fight for recess too. That was one of the most beautiful struggles that I got to be a part of when our union finally got it mandated that kids in Seattle would get to have at least 30 minutes of recess, because in schools predominantly serving kids of color, recess had dwindled to less than 15 minutes a day as the test machine just drove over our kids. So I'm glad that struggle hasn't been lost. And I am coming to you from Seattle, from occupied Duwamish and Coast Salish territory. Our city is named after a Duwamish chief, and the Duwamish people still don't have federal recognition and are struggling for their rights today. And I'm very excited to join you for the Will Miller Social Justice Lecture Series today. I greatly appreciate the invitation, because I want to talk to you all about my life's work in the struggle for social justice unionism and to make Black Lives Matter at school. And there have been some real breakthroughs in these struggles in recent years that I can't wait to share with everybody here today. So I want to begin with a quick overview of the Black Lives Matter at School week that happened recently. And I want to talk about some of the history of social movement unionism and outline some of the history of the Black Lives Matter at School movement to find out how those intersect. And I want to talk about transforming public education and the labor movement in this country to make sure that Black Lives Matter at school and everywhere else. And, this February was the 4th annual Black Lives Matter at School National Week of Action. And it was incredible. The number of communities registering as having participated in a Black Lives Matter at School action tripled in size this year. When you go to the National Education Association's website to see the map of who has checked in, it's amazing to see communities across the South, in the Midwest, and even a couple in Canada now. It's gone international. And I'm excited to say that for the first time, the American Federation of Teachers, the second largest teachers union, endorsed Black Lives Matter at School week. And we had already had the support of the NEA, my union, the National Education Association, because of the resolution that was put forward by Cecily Mark Cruz, the president of the LA Teachers Union, and also of the Black Caucus of the NEA. And Cecily Mark Cruz did an incredible job promoting the week of action. And I just want to read to you her story in our book, Black Lives Matter at School, an Uprising for Educational Justice. She writes about getting a resolution passed in one of the largest unions in the country to support Black Lives Matter. And she wrote, in 2016, I brought a new business item to the NEA Representative Assembly asking the body to recognize and promote Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action in our schools. I had hoped for the best and I planned for the worst. The NBI needed to pass by a majority on the floor of 10,000 delegates. As I waited at the microphone for my name to be called, I reread what I had written. I knew that my words could help make or break the endorsement of the NEA supporting Black Lives Matter at school. Finally, my name was called, and I looked out at the crowd and I stated, the Black Lives Matter movement is a powerful nonviolent peace movement that systematically examines injustices that exist at the intersections of race, class, and gender. This week of action promotes a set of national demands that focus on improving the school experience for students of color. I spoke calmly, stating that the national demands were guiding principles. We demanded that NEA stand in solidarity, and when the NBI passed overwhelmingly, shouts of joy, cheers, and crying erupted in the assembly hall. And that support has been critical to helping our struggle expand across the country, so that this year in California, we have the first state that passed a resolution in the state assembly that Black Lives Matter at school is now an official part of the state. Incredible victory. And this year we've gone beyond just organizing our week of action in the schools for Black lives and created the year of purpose for Black lives, so that every month has a different day of action and theme around the struggle to make Black students and educators and families' lives valued in our educational system. And I can tell you the best endorsement that we have about the power of this work comes from the fact that we are scaring the racists with this work. You only have to check Fox News if you can stomach it. But Laura Ingraham was beside herself this year with attacks against Black Lives Matter at school on her program. And, you know, I received many threats and hateful mail, along with many of the other leaders in Black Lives Matter at school. But it's only a sign that our power is growing. And you can look at the fact that there are now 8 states that are trying to pass bills to restrict anti-racist teaching or the teaching of the 1619 Project. In West Virginia, there's a pending bill in the legislature that would ban the teaching of solidarity along with this anti-racist teaching. Incredible that they would try to stifle free speech and the right of educators to teach about the value of Black people. But it's also an endorsement of how strong our movement is growing and the fact that they're worried about it. And much of this struggle was organized by unionized rank and file teachers around the country. And social justice unionism has a long history that I just want to briefly touch on. I think social justice unionism is really about fusing the power of social movements, often in the streets or on the campuses, with the power of labor. And that kind of organizing has been happening for a long time, but I think the term really emerges out of the struggles in South Africa against apartheid. So you had the movements in the streets and in the townships, and the Black consciousness movement on the campuses from students that was so vital to inspiring people to resist the racist apartheid regime in South Africa. and inspired a worldwide solidarity campaign. And my dad was actually one of the Black leaders of the solidarity movement with the struggles of Black South Africans in Seattle in the 1980s. But when the Congress of South African Trade Unions, known as COSATU, and the mine workers joined that movement, well, that's when it really got kicked up to another level. They went on strikes, political strikes against the government that brought a whole nother level of power to the movement, workers' power, that could shut down the economy and halt the profits of South African capitalists. And this was one of the major factors in the victorious revolution against apartheid. And Black people in the US have a long and important tradition of struggling with and organizing inside unions for social justice. And it should be understood that unions certainly have a mixed record with regard to supporting anti-racist struggles, but at the same time, when those struggles have been supported, it has been one of the most effective tools in challenging racism. And I actually just want to quote my friend Brian Jones, an incredible educator and education director for the Schomburg Center for Black Culture in New York, wrote this: "To be clear, unions have not always been flawless vehicles of justice or anti-racism in this country. At their worst, unions have been outright racist, and many explicitly excluded African Americans for a long time. However, the ideology of white supremacy has always been an Achilles heel of the union movement, a weakness. At its high points, when it has grown in strength and size, radical activists have pushed the unions to include Black workers and to take up their special demands." And so you only have to learn the history of the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, and the important history that Black labor and Black workers played in the forming of one of the most important labor federations, right, in the 1930s. Or look to the fact that Rosa Parks made use of trade unions as an important resource to support the Montgomery bus boycott, or the fact that A. Philip Randolph, the head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, was the lead organizer for the 1963 March on Washington, one of the high points of the civil rights movement, right? And it was predominantly organized by the Black gay man, Bayard Rustin, who was also a radical socialist organizer. But people sometimes forget that the march's tagline was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, right? And that jobs and economic demands were central to the fight for Black liberation. And we shouldn't forget Martin Luther King's final struggle when he organized the Poor People's Campaign and went down to Memphis to support striking sanitation workers. You know, 2 of these Black sanitation workers had been crushed in the back of a garbage truck. And that was the final straw for workers who had been mistreated for a long time. And they went on strike. And Martin Luther King wanted to fuse the power of the civil rights movement with the power of organized labor, and went down and supported that strike and gave his final speech calling for a strike and asking other workers to join in a strike with these sanitation workers in solidarity before he was assassinated, right? And Martin Luther King spelled out the importance of fusing social movements with the struggle for Black liberation. He said the 2 most dynamic movements that have reshaped the nation during the past 3 decades are the labor and the civil rights movements. Our combined strength is enormous. And I hope that folks will keep that in mind as we figure out how to struggle and advance the Black Lives Matter movement. Today, we need to remember those words, that combining the movement in the streets and on the campuses with the movement of organized labor as Martin Luther King said, the combined strength is potentially enormous. And so I want to tell you the story of the Black Lives Matter at School movement and the origins of it and its central demands. But before I do that, I don't think I can tell that story until I've first said that Black people who were enslaved on plantations had to sneak off those plantations and illegally teach each other to read and write at great risk, right? They could be maimed, tortured, or killed if they had been found to be literate. And they called it stealing a meeting, and they went off and taught each other anyway, right? And that's the tradition that we stand in. And I want to tell you about the Black Lives Matter at School movement, but I can't do that until we first acknowledge that it was Black people who built the public education system across the South in the wake of the Civil War during the Reconstruction era, building new schools with the Freedmen's Bureau, schools that had Black children sitting next to poor white children in integrated classrooms in the 1860s, something that wouldn't happen for many decades later because of the imposition of Jim Crow segregation, right? And I want to tell you the story of the Black Lives Matter at School movement today, but first I think we need to acknowledge an organization that was simply known as the Teachers Union in New York City. And the Teachers Union, or the TU, was a group that was organized by members of the Communist Party. And they partnered with the NAACP and parent radicals who came together to say, we want to get rid of the racist textbooks our kids are having to learn from that are glorifying the Ku Klux Klan and replace them with anti-racist curriculum. And I want to tell you about Black Lives Matter at School, but first we need to acknowledge the civil rights movement's magnificent tradition of the freedom schools and people like Septima Clark that built a radical pedagogy that was about problem-posing education to solve real problems in society and organizing Black people to become literate in service of movements for justice. And the final exam at those schools wasn't some meaningless high-stakes standardized test, but it was going to register to vote or organizing others into the struggle. And we should acknowledge the Black Panther Party's liberation schools and the proliferation of the Afrocentric schools that flourished across the country in the 1970s, right? And that's the great tradition that we stand in today. And Black Lives Matter at School is rooted in that tradition and really embraces a politics of radical anti-capitalist, queer, Black feminist politics that have guided us to an intersectional analysis of identity and oppression that helps us fight for the liberation of all Black children and all Black educators. And I want to give a shout out to my sister Okaikor Irie Price, who has been one of the visionaries that's helped develop the politics of our struggle. And these politics are desperately needed because the current education system in this country is so much organized around punishment, control, fear, and shame. And we need a total transformation of this education system to make it about healing and joy and collaboration and problem solving. And I can make this evident to you by looking at the suspension rates in our country. Black students are suspended at 4 times the rate of white students for the same infractions, right? And it's actually Black girls who are suspended the most disproportionately at some 6 or 7 times the rate of white girls. And that has been detailed by Monique Morris in her book Push Out that I recommend everybody read and learn from. And the desperate need for the Black Lives Matter at School movement was driven home for me only a couple of weeks ago when an investigative report was released in our local NPR station that revealed that a predominantly white school in northern part of Seattle had taken a boy named Jaleel and had locked him in an outdoor facility they called the Cage. The principal had authorized this because this boy Jaleel, who suffered from PTSD, had a temper tantrum. And whenever he had a temper tantrum, they would lock him away and only unlock it to slide him a tray of food that he had to eat on the cold, hard concrete because they didn't even give him a desk and a chair. And white students would walk by and stare and point at him, just preparing them to accept the society where Black lives are cast aside, are imprisoned. And it's really a horrific reality that exists for Black students across this country that's made worse by the presence of police officers in our schools, so that 14 million children in America go to a school that's missing one of the following: a nurse, a school counselor, a school psychologist, right, or a social worker. And this is the deep problems that are driving the Black Lives Matter at School movement. And this is why we have to organize and create a whole different school system. And the movement started in my own hometown of Seattle. It started back in 2016 at an elementary school named John Muir Elementary. And this was the school year that started right after the summer when Philando Castile and Alton Sterling had been murdered by police. And the educators at John Muir Elementary School wanted those students to know that they were loved and nurtured and that that school was a safe place for them. And so they organized an event with the community, with an organization called Black Men United to Change the Narrative, and with the parents. And they wanted to get especially the Black parents outside of the school to high-five the youth as they came into school that day and hold an assembly and rally for Black history and culture. And the art teacher, an incredible educator named Julie Trout, designed a shirt that said, "Black Lives Matter, we stand together, John Muir Elementary School." Well, the media found out that teachers were going to wear shirts that said Black Lives Matter, and then hate mail from white supremacists started streaming into the school, and one particularly hateful individual made a bomb threat against John Muir Elementary School simply because the educators there wanted to nurture and uplift the lives of their Black students. And my friend and colleague Wayne Au, co-editor, one of the editors of Teaching for Black Lives and an editor for Rethinking Schools, his son went to that school. So it particularly hurt my heart when that happened, and the school district actually officially had to cancel the event and brought in bomb-sniffing dogs that morning. Well, some of the courageous educators went through with the event anyway, but it was much smaller than it would have been. And so Wayne put me in touch with some of the educators there. We brought them to a meeting of our union caucus, the social equity educators, and we came up with the plan. We were going to take a resolution to our union and demand our union stand in solidarity with John Muir. But we knew that if we really stood in solidarity, we wouldn't just pass a resolution that said so. We would all wear shirts to school that said Black Lives Matter. And so part of our resolution stated that October 19, 2016 would be Black Lives Matter at School Day in Seattle. And we called on every educator to wear that shirt to school. And the resolution passed. But then a new fear gripped me, which was that what if very few teachers wear the shirt that day? That will certainly send a message to especially the Black youth in Seattle, that their lives aren't really valued. So we got to work organizing. And the Social Equity Educators Caucus worked with our union, the Seattle Education Association. We drew in the NAACP, and the Seattle PTA joined us. We held press conferences. We organized T-shirt deliveries to schools across Seattle. And by October 19th, we had sold over 2,000 T-shirts, and other schools created their own shirts, so that we had some 3,000 out of the 5,000 educators in Seattle participating in the Day of Action, many of them teaching lessons about the Black freedom struggle that day. And that eruption of solidarity was captured in the media, and that amazing educators in Philadelphia saw what we had done, and they took our action to a whole nother level. The Union Caucus in Philadelphia changed the Day of Action into a week of action, and they broke down the 13 principles of the Black Lives Matter Global Network into teaching points for each day of the week. Incredible action, and shout out to Tamara Anderson, who really drove that vision for the week of action, so that we could have an intersectional approach to teaching Blackness, so that, on Monday we teach about restorative justice and love and empathy, and on Tuesday we teach about globalism and the African diaspora, and on Wednesday we teach about Black queer identity and Black trans identity, and on Thursday we can teach about intergenerational and Black people and Black villages, and on Friday we can teach about Black women and being unapologetically Black. And the co-editor of our book, Black Lives Matter at School, Denisha Jones, saw what they had done in Philadelphia, and she invited them to present at a conference of Free Minds, Free People, where there were educators from all over the country who went to that session, and they all decided that they should organize this event nationally. And they got back in touch with us in Seattle, and we organized national calls, and we formed a national steering committee, and we came up with demands. Our first demand was to end zero tolerance discipline and replace it with restorative justice. Our second demand was to hire more Black teachers. 26,000 Black teachers have been pushed out of classrooms and are no longer teaching since 2002. We also know that Black teachers have a profound effect on Black students, raising graduation rates dramatically for Black students who have even one Black teacher in their K-12 career. Our third demand was for ethnic studies and Black studies. And we've had some huge breakthroughs in that struggle. A coalition formed here in Seattle that had the NAACP leader, Rita Green, and educators, John Greenberg and Tracy Castro Gill, and students who pushed through the struggle that made the ethnic studies department in Seattle. And this year, I'm proud to say we have a new Black Studies program specifically in addition that has just begun. And then the following year, we actually added a fourth demand. And this was so important and really at the behest of other organizations such as Dignity in Schools that had been leading campaigns for police-free schools. And so we added a demand for funding counselors, not cops. And this has really been the unifying platform that has brought together thousands of educators across the country with tens of thousands of students who they've taught about this, that has the potential to really transform our schools. And I want to begin to wrap up this evening by saying that the fundamental problem with our education system is the same fundamental problem of all of the systems and institutions in our country. They are a product of an economic and political structure of capitalism that is built upon profit, racism, oppression, and inequality. And today, the 8 richest people have as much wealth as the bottom 3.5 billion people on the planet. And I want to suggest to you all today that those numbers do not run parallel, right? It's not simply that there happen to be some rich people and happen to be some poor people. The truth is, you cannot have that kind of untold, obscene wealth without that kind of untold, obscene poverty. And so I think the Occupy movement was right that it is the 99% versus the 1%, but we won't ever be able to unite the 99% in a struggle for the resources that we need to survive if we don't make the fight against racism central to our social movements and the labor movement. So we also have to be clear that economic inequality and institutional racism don't operate on separate tracks. They reinforce each other, so that racism is projected by the corporate media and the politicians. You know, they try to convince us that immigrants are to blame for unemployment, or that black criminals are to blame for poverty, or Muslim terrorists are to blame for shifting billions of dollars from domestic spending to the war on terror. But in effect, we're told that the least powerful among us are to blame for the problems in our society, and the billionaires are just innocent bystanders, right? That's the narrative that they want to advance. But I want to suggest to you a different reality and wrap up with this. And I think Martin Luther King put it very well. And this is the King that they don't teach you in school unless you're at one of the schools that is part of the Black Lives Matter at School movement. But Martin Luther King said, you can't talk about solving the economic problem of black people without talking about billions of dollars. You can't talk about ending the slums without first saying profit must be taken out of the slums. You're really tampering and getting on dangerous ground now because you're messing with folk then. You are messing with the captains of industry, and now this means that we are treading in difficult water, because it really means that we are saying that something is wrong with capitalism. There must be a better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move towards democratic socialism. And I think we need to reimagine our school system, our economic system, and our political system along the lines of what we've seen recently with the emergence of the Red State Revolt of educators and predominantly Republican-controlled states who shut down the entire school system in states like West Virginia and Kentucky, demanding more school funding, right? Or in the incredible struggle in LA, where they took on billionaires like Eli Broad and didn't only demand an increase in wages and benefits for educators, but had a social justice union approach by demanding a multi-million-dollar fund for undocumented immigrant students so that they could have legal protection to support their families. And the union also demanded an end to quote-unquote random searches in the schools that too often targeted Black and brown students. And they also, in that strike, won a nurse for every school. And so I want to just finally end with the words of one of my students. My student, Israel Presley, has a chapter in our book, Black Lives Matter at School, and he, I think, talks about the power of this movement. He says, during the week of action, I learned that Blackness could be part of every subject in school. I was finally being taught things about myself. I learned about the Black contributions to science in science class. I had a math teacher at Garfield who did excellent work, Miss Din. She didn't use math to talk about the negative statistics of Black people, no. She used math to talk about the possibilities we could achieve. It felt powerful. Black Lives Matter at School has showed us that our community can organize a fight and come together to celebrate ourselves and our accomplishments. We are no longer living in a history of defeat. We are living in a future of success. So thank you all for having me this evening. And I hear we're going to have time for some Q&A. So I look forward to getting a chance to hear from you all and see if there's any lessons in my work that can help support your struggles.
Okay. So thank you so much for that talk, Jesse. The first question that we have is one that's a little more specific to Vermont. So this person asked, one particular challenge in Vermont is how the state is overwhelmingly white in general, and the teaching force reflects that. What do you think is the best way for white teachers to be authentic allies and champions for our students of color?
Yeah, that's an important question. And as much as it might be specific to Vermont, it's a problem that is all across the country because 80% of educators in the United States are white. In my home state of Washington State, 90% of educators are white. And so this is a common problem. One of the things we have to do is organize to demand the hiring and retention of Black educators. And there's a whole history of why we've lost so many Black educators. This goes back to the Brown versus Board of Education decision that while it was an important victory to integrate the schools, it also decimated the Black schools and led to the layoffs of thousands of Black educators. And then in recent years, the whole corporate education reform movement has had a focus on testing and punishing schools who have low test scores. And because the tests were built on institutional racism and are designed to reproduce institutional racism, they label the Black schools as failing, and then they close those schools. And those are schools that have disproportionately Black teachers. So I just wanted to begin by saying we do need to organize the struggle to fight for more Black educators. But that being said, you know, because we have overwhelming majority of teachers being white, we can't build a Black Lives Matter at school movement without them. And it's critical that white educators become allies and co-conspirators in this struggle. And we have an important chapter written by 3 white educators in our book, Black Lives Matter at School, that will give you a lot more detail about and some of the specificities of what it takes to be an anti-racist white educator. I think one of the most important things is to begin by learning about the history of race, where it came from, how it was designed to divide and conquer, and how it's integral to the capitalist system. And I think that white educators need to examine their own identities and understand how they show up in the classrooms and their relationship to whiteness. And I think they have to engage in collective organizing. I think that it's critical that you not only teach anti-racist lessons in your classroom, but that you join together with other educators. You can hold study groups. You can do study groups on Bettina's Love's book, We Want to Do More Than Survive, around abolitionist educating, or Black Lives Matter at School, or the other book I co-edited, Teaching for Black Lives, and gather people together and also rely on your Black students, right? Or your students of color to understand they have a lot of brilliance, and ask them what they're hungry to learn about, right? So there's so many resources out there, from Rethinking Schools, the Zen Education Project, the Abolitionist Teaching Network, Black Lives Matter at School, to help you get started with this work.
Great. Another question that is topical here. Since the beginning of the pandemic, and this has become a louder and louder call as the school year has gone on, there's been this chorus that it's vital to get students back in schools as soon as possible, because students, particularly students of color, particularly low-income students, are being enormously impacted by being at home, and it's a vital task to reopen schools kind of at all costs. How do you engage with this claim as somebody who is obviously committed to the safety of yourself as an educator and your coworkers, but also the safety of your students, both their physical health and their mental health?
No, that's such an important question. And I want to begin by saying that I think that in-person learning is so crucial. I think that part of the corporate education reform movement has been about trying to move education increasingly online and with computers, because they can replace educators with computers, and they can have one teacher teach to hundreds of students and save a lot of costs that way. And they can sell software to school districts and make a profit off of it. And so I think it's important that we resist the moves to online education, because the power of education is really about coming together to collectively solve problems. And the collaboration that you have in a classroom just simply cannot be replicated online. And that being said, the only thing more important than that is the safety and health of our students, our educators, and our families, right? And there are politicians that are clamoring to get the schools back open before it's safe, because they know that sending children back to school is vital to reopening the economy and getting the workforce back into their jobs to restart the profit machine. And so we have to resist those premature calls to open schools before we have, the proper protocols in place. I mean, I've been trying to launch the hashtag COVID testing, not standardized testing, vaccinations, not examinations, right? We need, PPE. And in my city, Seattle, we have the two richest people the world has ever known, and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. And we have Amazon and Microsoft and Boeing and Starbucks. We have cranes on every corner and a real estate industry that's booming. But we don't have a nurse in every school every day. And you want to talk about opening the schools in the middle of a global pandemic, and we don't even have a nurse in every school? It's absolutely absurd, right? But one of the ways that they try to skirt the complete absurdity of and cruelty of opening the schools before they're ready to is this narrative of learning loss that I just want to take a minute to break down, because they're using this term as if it's a term employed by civil rights activists, right? Saying that we need to use high-stakes standardized testing to measure the amounts of learning loss that are happening in Black and brown communities. And we need to reopen the schools as quickly as possible so Black kids don't fall further and further behind and the achievement gap continues to grow. And I just want to say, I think there's so many things wrong with that narrative. First of all, that language of the achievement gap is a deficit model that always puts Black kids behind without understanding the strengths of Black students, the brilliance of Black students that they bring to classrooms every day. When I taught my ethnic studies class at Garfield, it's the first class I had that was integrated, that had AP students who were predominantly white with quote unquote general ed students who are predominantly Black and brown. And when they came into the class together, it was fascinating to me, because when I told the students they wouldn't be taking any multiple choice tests, right? And that could create some anxiety for my AP students who had been trained to score very well on those tests. And what those students found out was that my metrics were about, could you collaborate with others to identify problems in society and find collective solutions to it? And it turns out that our Black students were very adept at understanding problems in our society, like institutional racism, and were far in advance of our white students, right? So we can't talk about an achievement gap if we transform the purpose and meaning of education. And I'll finally end by just saying that I think the greatest group project of all time was turned in by Black students this spring and summer when they linked arms and took to the streets to demand justice for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, right? They taught the entire nation the power of solidarity and the depths of institutional racism in this country. And that's a real education right there, right? And I think that this learning loss narrative is just being used to try to jumpstart the economy rather than support our youth.
So the next question is about the role of organized labor, and especially your own experiences with it in organizing to get rid of cops in schools. I understand you were part of a successful drive to build labor support for expelling police from schools in Seattle or the Seattle area. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and draw out some lessons from that we can extrapolate from around the country.
Yeah, this has been one of the greatest victories of the uprising for Black lives that happened this summer, and of the many groups that have been fighting for educational justice, like the Advancement Project, Dignity in Schools, Students Deserve, and the Black Lives Matter at School movement that have been calling for police-free schools. And, you know, there's a chapter in our book by a student named Nathaniel, who was the student representative on the Minneapolis Public Schools and school board. And he lived only a few blocks from where George Floyd was killed. And after death, Nathaniel went down to the corner and reflected on what he needed to do as he looked at the site where George Floyd took his last breath. And it was really incredible story that he tells in our book about helping to unite the many groups that have been working on this issue for a long time, launching a petition that got many thousands of signatures. And they became the first school district to expel the police during these uprisings, but it spread across the country. It spread to St. Paul, then it spread to the Denver public schools and the Oakland public schools and the Charlottesville public schools. And I'm proud to say to the Seattle public schools, 2 students here at Rainier Beach High School in the South End, Kiddist and Angelina, started a petition that got 14,000 signatures in the first couple days and pressured the school board to finally remove police from the schools, including my own high school. And we are currently in the struggle right now to replace them with restorative justice counselors and social workers. But I'm proud to say that my union did support that struggle and was part of the effort that made it victorious. And not only did we support expelling the police from the schools, but we also passed a resolution, my resolution, that called for defunding the police by 50%. And that movement has so far resulted in 20% reduction of the police budget in Seattle, and a resolution calling for the expulsion of the Seattle police from the King County Labor Council, which I think was a huge victory for labor, because think about your favorite struggle from any point in U.S. history. I want everybody attending this to think about your favorite social justice struggle of all time, right? Maybe it was the fight for the 8-hour day. and the Haymarket Martyrs, or maybe it was women struggling for their right to vote, or maybe it was the Stonewall Rebellion that led to the modern LGBTQ liberation struggle. Maybe it was Rosa Parks sitting on the bus. Whatever your favorite struggle is, police were always on the wrong side. They were always on the side of breaking the picket line, arresting the activists, and they have never been on the side of labor or the social movements. And so for them to be in the House of Labor, to be part of our labor coalition, made absolutely no sense when they were brutalizing the members of all the other unions, like my union. I myself was assaulted by the Seattle police in 2015 at a Martin Luther King Day rally when I was pepper sprayed in the face, and there was no accountability for that officer, right? And so that was, we were part of passing resolutions from locals that ultimately was victorious, and they were expelled. I think one of the first examples in the country of police being expelled from the Labor Federation.
So we've just got a couple final questions here. One is about your experiences as an educator who is teaching this kind of a curriculum and raising your voice in this kind of a way within your community and school system, whether you've been targeted by principals or school administrators, or even gotten pushback from parents who may be considering, we hear this term like pushing a radical agenda, and if you have, how you've countered that, what your strategy is for addressing that pushback if it's come.
Yeah, I've received pushback. You can't do this work without being ready to be in a real struggle. I mean, when I was pepper sprayed by the police, I sued the Seattle Police Department, and my house was targeted. I had my window smashed in my car, my house and car spray painted, all kinds of messages, Fox News attacking our movement. I got people sending me Hitler quotes this year. It's a real struggle. But the key is to not do this work alone. And that's what's kept me safe, because I've always entered into the struggle with a collective. In 2013, there was a teacher who wanted to refuse to administer the MAP test, the Measures of Academic Progress standardized test at my school. And she contacted me and said she wasn't going to give it. And we organized the entire school to refuse to give it. And so when we were threatened with a 10-day suspension without pay for the tested subject teachers in math and reading, they didn't follow through on that threat because it was the entire school who had done it, right? And they could threaten John Muir Elementary School with a bomb threat. And they succeeded for a little while, but it led to the explosion of the entire Black Lives Matter at School movement and thousands of educators across the country doing it. And so they can threaten and intimidate, but when we organize collectively, our power of solidarity is much stronger.
Yeah, that's a great message to start to wrap up on here. With our final question is a question from a listener who I imagine is an educator, and she writes, how might we use our Vermont NEA to help institutionalize Black Lives Matter at school? And if you have recommendations for bringing this to our NEA board. And I think maybe if you can just talk more broadly, most people or many people who are in unions that are not oriented around social justice. And if you could just talk about your thoughts on how union members who would like to push their unions in this more of this direction can introduce these kind of politics into the labor movement where they live and work.
Well, I just want to end by saying that I learned a lot about how to do this work from Karen Lewis, who is one of my friends and mentors, the past president of the Chicago Teachers Union, who passed recently, rest in power, Karen Lewis, and she taught us all about how to fuse the power of communities and social movements with the power of labor. And the 2012 strike of the Chicago Teachers Union was really the first time I saw what that could look like and how you could fight for the demands of the community and the educators simultaneously, and you could win, and you could bring in questions about Black liberation as well. And I'm grateful to Karen for those lessons, and everyone should study her legacy. I think that one place to start is with our book, Teachers, Unions, and Social Justice. We just released this book, and it's a great place to begin study groups, or Black Lives Matter at School. Start study groups around our books and see who shows up, and then see if you can form a caucus like they did in Chicago with the Caucus of Rank and File Educators, CORE. And then I was inspired by that to help co-found the Social Equity Educators in Seattle. Right. And if starting a social justice caucus is critical so that those of you who are like-minded can push the union to take a social justice union approach, and then deepen the politics of that group. In Chicago, CORE began by reading Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, and developing an economic analysis of neoliberalism to understand what was happening to the Chicago public schools, right? So continue to deepen your analysis and join the social movements. Don't confine your activism to social justice pedagogy in the classroom, as important as that is. Join with the union struggle and with the Black Lives Matter at School movement to help transform these unions in our schools, right? Bring forward resolutions to your union, calling on the union should hold study groups around our book, Teaching for Black Lives, or Teachers, Unions, and Social Justice. And at the Zen Education Project, we've launched 30 study groups across the country this year around the book, Teaching for Black Lives, as part of our Teach the Black Freedom Struggle campaign. And we'll be opening that up to scores more study groups next year. So that's something else to look to help support you in this effort.
Great. And before we let you go, Jesse, can you just remind us of where folks who want to pick up those copies can go to get those? And if there are any other books or resources that you would like to give shout outs to at this point?
Absolutely. Yeah, people should go to rethinkingschools.org and check out the whole catalog of books. But at Rethinking Schools, you will find Teachers, Unions, and Social Justice. You'll also find Teaching for Black Lives, which is our book with teaching activities for all different kinds of subjects around how to teach for Black lives. You can go to Haymarket Books to get our book, Black Lives Matter at School, that details the movement, including a whole section on unions and the Black Lives Matter at School movement. And, you know, I'd be remiss not to point out that the Boston Teachers Union last year was attacked by the police union and told they should stop organizing for Black Lives Matter at School. And the speech that was given by the Boston Teachers Union president is in our book. I'd highly recommend people check out her courageous words about why they weren't backing down. And I would suggest people go as well to the Zen Education Project that has free downloadable social justice lessons. And finally, they should go to Black Lives Matter at School.com to follow our year of purpose and get involved with the upcoming days of action in our year of purpose. And people can follow me on Twitter or at IamAnEducator.com is my website, IamAnEducator.com. So thank you so much for having me this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the stories of the work I've been doing, and I wish you all the best in the struggles to come.
Thank you, Jesse. And this This recording will be on YouTube, so people should share this with other people that they think may be interested in discussing these ideas. So thanks everybody for joining us, and have a great night.
All right, thank you.